Right. We're a couple minutes past here, so we'll go ahead and get started. For those of you that just joined, welcome to today's production featured skill on forecasting in MRP. Your presenter today is Mike. My name is Jocelyn, and I'm going to be your facilitator today. And we want to make sure that we can get your questions answered throughout the presentation. So throw in any questions you have into that Q&A or chat feature there at the bottom, and we'll make sure that we get those answered. And with that, I will hand it off to you, Mike.
Sounds good. Hello and welcome to our Kickstarter webinar. Our topic today is forecasting and material resource planning, or MRP for short. My name is Mike Ivacek, and I'm a senior implementation consultant here for Encompass. So before we jump into the topic today, just for a little bit of housekeeping, if you guys can see my presentation through the share screen and hear my voice, please, if you want to practice by clicking that raise hand icon. Awesome. I got one hand. That's perfect. That's good enough for me. So you don't have to raise your hand if you have questions during the presentation today. Like Jocelyn said, if you have questions, go ahead and put those in the Q&A or chat function. We will try to field those as they come up, or if we don't get to that, there's always a Q&A and kind of questions section at the end of this after our demo to go more in depth with any questions that you guys might have as well. So without further ado, let's get started with our agenda for today. So before we get into the full setup of MRP and going through our MRP module, I wanted to highlight a few reporting options in OBEER OSpirits that don't require the setup of MRP. So I like to call them non-MRP forecasting tools or reports. So that'll be first. After that, we'll go into what is MRP and how to set things up in your database to use MRP. After that, we'll be talking about how to create a forecast and then using the setup and the forecast to run our MRP wizard scenarios, and then using that scenario then to put in your MRP recommendations and actually put in purchase orders, production orders, etc., to meet your supply and demand. So let's jump into non-MRP forecasting. So the first report I want to cover today, it's a crystal report in our system. Any report that Orchestra is typically built is called a crystal report in our system. And this one is called available to promise. So like I said, being a crystal report, this means that it's super PDF friendly, but not so much Excel friendly when you run this report. And what is great about this report compared to the next report I'm going to show you that I'm going to highlight is there's a bunch of selection criteria, as you can see kind of in this screenshot. So a pro about running this report is that you can include sales quotes as demand, as opposed to normally a sales quote's not pictured as a demand document in the system, but this report allows you to use that as a demand. The function of this report is to show each item per warehouses on hand, committed, and ordered based on the open documents that you have in the system. So there's going to be a theme with a lot of these reports as opposed to MRP, which I'll get to in a little bit. A lot of these non-MRP reports are going to be based on documents that you have in the system. So it's really going to be important, like how many purchase orders have I put in the system, and like how far out. How far is my production planning been planned out? And sales orders, how far out are sales orders being entered with my distributors or horse wholesalers? So it's very dependent on how much documentation you're putting in the system or how much planning you're doing. Like I said, this isn't as easy of a document to kind of get in the Excel format that you might want, but this one's very nice if you need to print something off to kind of show, like maybe in a meeting or something. Our next report, so this is SAP standard support. It's also available to promise. This is called inventory status report. And it's going to give you essentially the same results as our other report here. It's going to give you the in-stock, committed, and ordered, just like the previous one. But because it's not a crystal report, this report's a lot easier to copy and paste that table into Excel if that's the format you're going for. Another useful function about this report, as opposed to the other one, is the ability to double click on a row to see a detailed list of the open documents that contribute to like the committed and ordered column. So in the screenshot here, if I double clicked on the first row, RM 2005, I could see what actual documents are contributing to that committed and ordered column, which allow you to do a little bit of detective work if you need to, or just get a little bit more insight into those documents. Another report option that I want to highlight is the quick raw inventory planning sheet. So this is another of our orchestrated reports. So it's going to be in that Crystal report kind of PDF format. But some additional functionality that this one gives that the other ones didn't give that I've listed already is it gives additional columns here, such as total quantity short, estimated weeks on hand, quantity that you'll need to order. And this also includes any lead days that you have set up on your item master data as well. So when I lead days being that it's one of the MRP setup pieces. So if you can see on the screenshot there, our 2-row bulk has set up a lead day. So when I purchase this, it typically takes my vendor 5 days to get that delivered. So that's how lead days work on your raw material items. You might be familiar with lead days with your production items already, being like, once I execute my green beer, it sits in a fermenter for 11 days, and that's the lead days in production. But this is how it works with raw materials. And lastly, for our non-MRP items, I wanted to highlight one of my favorites here. This is called the Future Inventory Status Analysis, or if that's a mouthful for you, we call it the FISA report. We also like to call this our mini MRP report. If you don't have the MRP module set up. The reason why I call it mini MRP, it allows you to run a supply and demand forecast, choosing by any date today or in the future, hence the future part of the name. And it'll show you a day-by-day supply and demand forecast for each item that you've selected with your parameters, and highlight any items that may go into either zero stock or fall below your minimum stock inventory levels that you might have set up. And again, this is going to be purely based on the documents that you already have in the system, whereas MRP allows you to put in your forecast that you might have to make it so I don't have to put in 3 weeks full of sales orders, or I don't have to plan production for 2 months out and then go back and scrap it once I figure out what's actually more accurate kind of thing. But what's nice about this report is it does give you that day-by-day supply and demand, and it goes about 3 weeks out. So, for example, if I wanted to run it for a couple months, what I would do is I'd run it for today, and then at that end date that the report lists, I would then run the report again for that new date, and then you can just keep going 3 weeks out kind of thing, if you wanted to go farther than this report actually offers. It's a common question I get there. But that's it for our non-MRP forecasting tools. There's probably more out there, but those are the highlights that I wanted to cover on today's webinar. Now for the main topic of today's webinar, MRP. So let's climb into what exactly MRP entails. Like I said, there's MRP, to start things off, very overview. It's used to recommend what you need to make or buy. And there's those 2 keys of success there. There's setting up your item master data, which we'll be going over next, and then inputting those forecasts that you probably have outside of the system in Excel somewhere, or maybe have sales history that you wanna put in for your forecasting. So we'll go over those setup pieces, and then we'll go over running. Once I have the forecast and my item set up, going through the MRP wizard to then create a scenario and then have an order recommendation at the end of that. We'll go through that in the presentation. I'll go through a quick demo of a sales forecast in my demo database, and then we'll open it up too for overall kind of questions and things after that. But we're going to start with setup. So in item master data, there's a bunch of fields that contribute to MRP. Luckily, Orchestrated's made a tool called the Planning Management Utility. It can be used to set up the following fields in your item master data without having to manually go field by field, item by item. This is in kind of an Excel-friendly format that you can edit and then send back to your database. So the first one I wanted to cover, use an MRP. It's a yes or no switch. This is kind of the first kind of firewall, whether or not an item is included when I run my recommendations. So yes or no if it's an MRP item. So next one, minimum order quantity. This is the minimum this item can be ordered for. I think a good example of this is when you order malt, but my vendor has a minimum order quantity of 100 pounds. That means if I do anything other than like if MRP recommends 50 to meet this production quota, it's then going to say, no, we have to order 100 because we can't have, the vendor won't accept anything less than 100. The next column, order multiple, is defined as the numeric value to define the size of your order. And to put that in layman's terms, an example would be if I have the order multiple set to 12 and you're 20 short based on that MRP scenario, MRP's then gonna recommend 24 because that's your multiple of 12 there. So it's another, like with minimum order quantity, it says can't have anything below this, and then order multiple, it says I have to order in increments of this kind of thing. Order interval, not really typically used. It involves additional setup, so I usually skip over that one. Preferred vendor. So with raw materials, if you specifically have a vendor that I always buy malt from, I always buy cans from, that kind of thing. If you set up a preferred vendor, when you go through your MRP scenario and get that recommendation, this will already be filled out for you. And this is really only useful if you only have that sole vendor. Otherwise, we recommend keeping that blank just in case, because if it is blank, it'll kind of force you to fill in, no, this is the vendor I want to purchase from, rather than accidentally putting in a purchase order with a vendor that is set to preferred vendor, but you might not actually want to purchase from. Like I mentioned in one of the previous slides, so lead days. For purchase items, this is the number of days from when the purchase order is entered to typically when that order hits your warehouse. And then for production, it's when you execute the production order to the time it's actually done and completed and ready to move on to the next step. Minimum stock quantity and maximum stock quantity, I'll kind of combine those two. I don't see maximum quite as much, but with minimum stock quantity, this is the level of inventory you can have in stock before it's considered kind of not below physical zero, but before we need to order some. So an example of this is I can't have less than 100 pounds of malt in stock at all times, just in case, like that's our kind of safety net there. So if it falls below 100, then I need to order it kind of thing. Whereas max stock quantity, an example of this would be I have a grain silo. I can't physically put more than that in, so I can't order enough to overfill my grain silo. And I will say, quick caveat here too, there is one other field that is important to MRP that's not in this planning management utility that I'll go over in a little bit, that is available with another utility that we'll have. So in a little bit here, I'll go over that more detail. But for the most part, this utility gives you pretty much everything you need to set up your items to run MRP. You can also use the utility. One of the functionalities is to actually create a forecast, so you don't have to do it in the system. A lot of people use this tool to make forecasts. If they already have it in Excel, it's very easy to kind of copy and paste this. As you can see in the screenshot here, it's really easy. So in the screenshot, I'm going by monthly on that top screenshot. In June, I'm going to project 100 sales of these cases, or 1,000. July, 1,200 cases, and so forth. So it's easy, really copy to create and copy and paste a forecast into here. I'll also be going over how to create that in the system. There's a little more functionality you can do creating a forecast in the system. But the benefit of this one is it's a lot more easy to copy paste if you already have something in Excel. All right, so like I mentioned earlier in the previous slide, you can also create forecasts in the system. There's pros and cons of doing it either way. With creating in the system, the first thing you can do is that the additional functionality you can do is create a forecast using increase or decrease sales by percentages by whatever cadence you're going by, daily, weekly, or monthly cadences. And you can see that in the screenshot here. There's the plus and minus cadence kind of up in the upper right corner. So I didn't put it in the screenshot. So if I did set it, it'd go like 10%. So 250 would go up by 10% and then 10% again, et cetera, et cetera. So you can do it by cadences there. The other functionality you can do here if you're wanting to is you can generate a forecast based on sales history that's in your database currently, and you can do it by sales orders or by deliveries and invoices. As you can see in the screenshot forefront here, you can generate that forecast, and then in the advanced settings there, it says based on sales history. So if your sales history is super accurate and you don't have that information outside of OBIR and like in a forecasting Excel sheet somewhere, if you don't have those forecasts, you can generate it within the system depending on how accurate your sales history is within your database. So little caveat, how clean is your data to be able to use that generate forecast functionality. So we did our setup pieces. We set up our items. We either copy and pasted our forecast or created our forecast in the system. That's our two major setup pieces to be able to really get into the MRP module. So now we're ready to run the MRP wizard. The MRP wizard, like most wizards in SAP and OBIR, will walk you through this step by step through going through different filtering parameters that you want, and kind of just guide you through till you're ready to run your scenario and recommendations. And then, like I mentioned before, there is the scenario will either recommend you will either make or buy on this little drop down here in item master data. Make being it'll recommend a production order, or buy it'll recommend a purchase order. So that field is slightly important, but like I said earlier, that's a thing that you can edit on item master utility. It's not in the planning management utility, but it is available to like switch between those in a different utility, rather than having to do everything manually one by one in item master data. So this first step of your MRP wizard, our scenario selection. So from here, you can either create a new scenario if you're just starting off, or you can run an existing scenario and like change, if it's a existing one, change the dates for the scenario that you want to run or something like that. So you can create a new one or choose an existing one. You can have as many scenarios as you want, depending on what you're trying to do as well. Like if you're in charge of the finished goods, if you're in charge of, hey, I need to make sure packaging items are in stock. If I'm the brewer that needs to make sure I'm brewing wort, you'll be running different scenarios depending on what specifically you're looking at with your MRP forecast. So this is what the scenario details look like. This is the next screen. If I either click create new or existing, you're able to edit existing if you want to, or when you're creating new, this will be blank for you. Few fields to kind of highlight on this screen. So dates. You have to choose dates that you want to run for this scenario, and the starting date either has to be today's date or a date in the past based on the period. So like you can see in the screenshot, view data in periods of months. So it has to be a date prior to today or today, depending on that month period. Another one that I highly recommend if you're new to MRP or if you've been running it, there is a checkbox here that can cause vastly different results based on checking this or not, and that is ignore cumulative lead time. And what this does is it allows you to disregard the combined lead times of all the components in the bill of materials when calculating overall lead time for a finished product, instead of only considering the lead time set directly on the finished product. So essentially, it prevents the system from calculating the longest lead time within the bill of material when determining production scheduling. So like I mentioned, you're getting used to this and you're testing it out. Try checking it and running your scenario or unchecking it and seeing what differences you might have by checking that. And again, in layman's terms, what this is doing is it's only going to look at the lead time for if I'm running it for my sales forecast. It's only going to look at the lead time for my finished good if I ignore it. And if I don't ignore it, it's going to look at my lead time for my bright beer, for my green beer, for my wort, for my items to kind of plan that out and vastly change the timeline required to meet that supply and demand. The next one, kind of moving down the list here, display items with no requirements. So checking this will allow you to see all items that fall within the scenario and not just items that you need to buy or make. Display selected items only. Checking or unchecking this box will show you only the items you will select on the next screen here, or all the items allowed involved with that production. And lastly, another very important one, simulation. So if you're first starting out on this, I highly recommend checking that simulation. And what that does is it avoids accidentally creating a recommendation in the system and allows you to, like I said, test and go back and uncheck lead time, etc. So running a simulation kind of eliminates the potential user error of like, oops, I accidentally created this recommendation in the system. It allows you to kind of test and see before you're ready to commit to that. So if you're first testing out, again, try using create a test database just in case, and then use that simulation just in case as well, so you don't accidentally add something as you're just trying to run through test scenarios. The next screen on the wizard, or step 3, this is the item selection screen. This allows you to see only items that you want to see when running the MRP scenario recommendation. Examples of this. If I'm a brewer and I only need to worry about raw materials, only add my wort items here. If I'm a packager and only need to worry about packaging material, only add the packaging item group here. If I am producing finished goods and I need to hit those sales targets, only add finished goods. So with this screenshot example, I only want to see this particular SKU of Blonde Bach that I'm making. But let's say I'm running it for multiple brands or multiple SKUs. You'd want to make sure that you add those in there. So that's why the examples say like hit finished good item groups, hit packaging item groups, hit all of my wort. You can get as narrow and specific or wide as you want here with your item selection. Next one, inventory data source. So on this tab, you'll choose company or warehouse. So I'll kind of summarize what those are. So company consolidates all of the warehouses of the database into default warehouse for the recommendation. It's good if you only have one location. Warehouse, on the other hand, will separate each warehouse's supply and demand and is recommended if you have multiple locations. You want to run only MRP for your specific location or warehouse. So company will get everything and recommend it based on that default warehouse, or warehouse if you need to get specific by location. And the last step before we run our recommendation is we'll choose what existing documents you want to consider or reject potentially. This is also the step where we choose one or more of the forecasts we've created. And this is one of those screens where testing out a couple of times, it will impact your recommendation based on what documents you currently have in the database. So examples, if you already have purchase orders in for an item, uh, maybe you don't want to consider your open purchase orders that you have. Maybe you don't want to consider them. So you might uncheck that box. Or maybe you do want to, you already have open purchase orders and you don't want to over purchase. Yeah, you want to check that you have considered those purchase orders. So that's that left side column is considering to include. And then the right column there says reject. Um, Maybe you have a giant sales order for like a distributor that you just have out there, and you don't want to consider that for our supply and demand. You might want to restrict certain sales orders. You can do specific or just sales orders in general or something like that. Maybe you already have some production planned out. Maybe you have like a week or two already planned out. So look at production orders for that demand as well. Do not recommend something that's already has a production order open. So there's a lot of check boxes to kind of check here, depending on what specific scenario you're trying to run a recommendation for. And like I said, there's the forecast. So this is based on the previous forecast that we created. We enter that here on our data source. You can also do multiple forecasts if you have multiple created as well. And then our recommendation, do we want to recommend purchase requests or actual purchase orders? So depending on, again, what your business is like, if you want it to be purchase requests that you then transfer into orders, or if you don't mind the recommendation, actually just putting those orders in, that's what it will do based on that checkbox down there. All right, so this is the last screen before we actually run that recommendation. This is where too, like all these settings that we've set up, if you're starting a new scenario or if you like edited an existing scenario, there's the save scenario button in the lower right there. So if you made any changes or if this is a new one, click save scenario. That way you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. Again, if we selected simulation, it'll still make our MRT recommendations, but it won't actually let us create a recommendation document in the system, which I'll cover during the demo as well. All right. So once we hit run, we're going to get a screen that looks like this. So this is our MRP results. So based on of all the things that we've clicked through on our MRP wizard, based on the forecast we've put in, it'll spit out your MRP results here. So kind of doing a quick look at this, I ran my scenario on that blonde box kegs. And you can see here under the demand, you'll see that my forecasts are contributing to the our April, May, June, July demands that we have. That'll also contribute to that supply. It's going to create the supply based on our recommendations, which I'll go over more screenshots. I don't have specific screenshots for the recommendations. I don't think on the presentation, but I wanted to use that in the actual demo to kind of go over more hands-on with that. And you can see here that currently on the screenshot, we have our bright beer as listed as a possible problem item that we need to get into stock, and that's why it's highlighted in red. Which on our next screenshot, there's a little checkbox in the upper in our report that says filter possible problem items. So that's where if I check that box, it's only showing our bright beer for, hey, we need to get this into stock ASAP. Oh, and I do have our recommendations here. So the other tab on this MRP results, so we have report and then we have recommendations. So if I check recommendations, this is what's going to populate. So it shows a list of documents that are recommended to be created in order to meet that demand from our forecast that we ran our wizard for. A useful function on the screen too that we'll go over, I can show you in the demo, is you can filter by due date. So you can see what, based on our forecast, do we have to get in as soon as, like the sooner then later kind of thing, and then what down the road do we have to enter in as well. So this is where, like I said, depending on if you've run a simulation or not, in this screenshot, mine's a simulation. You'll notice there's a grayed out kind of button in the lower right screenshot here that says Save Recommendations. If you're in a simulation, that's going to be grayed out because you can't save it or accidentally save it. But if you didn't run a simulation, that would be available to click, or you can right click this table and say Order Recommendations, and it'll bring you both to the same window where it's going to say Order Recommendation. And this is where you'll actually check off documents that you want to create. This is where you're going to put in those vendors you want for purchase orders. So once we get into the actual demo, we can take a look and see what that looks like as well. But this is MRP in a nutshell. You've created those, you've set up all of your items to have those lead times and everything there, maybe minimum inventory stock quantities. You've created that forecast, so you don't have to make fake production orders like months in advance to kind of drive that demand and then undo it. I know I've heard customers having to do that in the past before they've really gotten involved with the MRP module. It's a lot of work to like then cancel production orders, or they might do that with sales orders too if they're just trying to get a demand in there. What the forecast really shines there is you don't have to do that. You're allowed to just put in, hey, we anticipate 1,000 cases or maybe 100 kegs this month kind of thing. And you don't have to actually put in the physical documents to drive that supply and demand using the MRP wizard then. So without further ado, we're going to jump into the MRP demo. I'll kind of cover some things that we covered earlier and then go through an example of that sales forecast in the MRP wizard. So I'm going to stop sharing for 1 second, jump into my demo database, and then we'll get into the demo. All right. So we are in our demo database. So the first thing I wanted to cover is just a little high-level overview of that planning management utility that I mentioned early on for setting up your items. So I'm going to click and open that quick. And then while that's opening too, we're going to open up item master data just to show you what it looks like if you weren't using the utilities and where they live on item master data. All right. So if I'm looking at an item master data, most of our fields are going to be in our planning data tab, but there's a few that aren't in there that do drive kind of the MRP module as well. So purchasing data is where you'll find your preferred vendor. So if I only buy 2-row bulk, which this one probably, yep. I only buy 2-row bulk from Brees. So this would be an example where I input Brees here. And again, this is on our planning management utility that I'll go over in a second. So you don't have to do every single item manually, but this I just wanted to highlight. That's where it lives. Our inventory data tab is going to be where our min and max inventory is. And this is warehouse specific. So for our multiple locations, maybe our main location, our max inventory is, or minimum inventory is 1,000 pounds. Whereas our third warehouse, it's smaller. So our minimum inventory is 500 pounds. That's where you'd set your minimum or max if that's applicable here. And then lastly, our planning data. So this is our yes or no to MRP. MRP or none, yes or no. So this is the first kind of gatekeeper, whether or not it'll show up in recommendations. Here's that procurement method. Do I make or buy this? I buy raw materials. So it's going to suggest a purchase order. Then our order interval multiple and minimum order quantity. It looks like I have order multiples on this item of 2,000. I don't know if I want that though. Maybe I can only do, actually, let's do 500. Minimum order quantity of 500 for bulk. And then maybe it only can go in 500 multiples. Like I said, order intervals, it involves setup, just not typically used. And then our lead time. So let's say if I put in a purchase order, it usually takes them 10 days to deliver it. That's where all of that lives. And this is how tedious and manual going in item by item would be. And that's why we have our planning management utility. I don't know if you guys can see this screen, so I'm going to stop share and share again. All right, so once you open this Excel document, you're going to go to item management and you're going to go to MRP items. It's going to load in all of your items that you have in OBIR. And then you can see here, use an MRP, yes or no, minimum order quantity, order multiple. Just like I mentioned before, it's all here for us in Excel format, so you can do quick and easy edits. If you do make edits, you can then click Send to Orchestrated, this button up here, and it'll send that back to Orchestrated. Like I mentioned too, there's the planning management, and you can click Demand Forecasts. From here, you can either load an existing forecast. So here's my 24/11. The one that we're going to go over in the example. So here's my forecast for my blonde box 12 half barrel kegs. So based on the parameters I set, here's my forecast. So 250, 300, 300, 350, etc. This is the demand that I'm setting in the forecast. That we'll go over in a little bit. So you can load and you can edit this too. So if you edit this forecast, you can send that data back as well. There's also the ability to create a new forecast here. So create a description, code, interval, months, what's our start and end date to create those periods like it's shown here. And you can actually create a forecast and input this data as well from here and send that to Orchestrated. So that's how the tool's used. Can be pretty handy for item management as well as creating those forecasts. Let's stop share here and I'll jump back into the database and we'll run through an example of my forecast that I created. All right, so we've done our item setup. We've created our forecast. Now we're ready to jump into the MRP module. Real quick, let's find my forecast just to show you what that looks like here. So again, here's our forecast. We can use this functionality as well. If you're creating a new one, it won't let me do it now that I've created this, but if I did add mode and started a new one, I could then, if I had the data in here, I could go by percentages. I can generate the forecast based on my advanced settings here. So based on our sales history, let's take a look at past sales orders, and then how far back do we want to look at sales history and to what date as well. You can also generate from here. But we're going to jump into our MRP wizard. So again, this is our welcome MRP wizard screen. Here's where I'd either create a new scenario or choose an existing one, which I'm going to choose my 2025 Bach blonde. Again, this is where I can edit stuff. Do I want to run it for the same parameters, or do I want to maybe maybe this period's already passed and I want to still run the scenario with I edited my forecast to go farther out, and I want to run the scenario again. You can always edit those dates. You can change this from months to weeks to days. Based on what these two are, it sets your planning horizon, so 6 months. You can consider holidays if you use your holidays. Not a lot of people manage that in Obeer, so you can either uncheck or check that depending on how good you are at that. So here's our ignore cumulative lead time. I'm going to keep that unchecked for this example. And then again, I'm going to keep these unchecked as well because I just want to run a scenario based on my item that I have on my forecast. And I'm going to keep this as simulation for now. I only care about my half keg, so I'm only going to keep this selected here. I don't want any other items to clog up my MRP scenario. I'm going to go company-wide. It doesn't matter. I only have the one location that I want to worry about. So I'm going to check this and uncheck that. And then so you can also include historical data here or only data within that planning horizon. I don't think I mentioned that during the presentation, but maybe you have older sales orders that you want to go on that supply and demand, or if you only want to look at documents within the planning horizon. So the 6 months that I did on my forecast, I only want to look at that. Maybe I want to reject a certain sales order. There's none here that are open currently. Maybe I want to restrict certain purchase orders. Again, there's none here to select from, but if there was, I could choose them to restrict them. I do want to, if there's any open production orders, use that in the supply. I don't have any sales blanket agreements. Yeah, if there's any sales orders, I want that to contribute. Blanket agreements, I don't really care about, but if there's any purchase orders in my planning horizon, I want that to be considered. And I want to use my forecast here to drive that demand. And I do want that to suggest purchase orders, not purchase requests. So because I made some changes, I'm going to go ahead and click Save Scenario, just so it saves my settings and I don't have to redo it next time I run this. So from here, you can also you don't have to go through every step if this is a pre-existing scenario, and you don't need to make too many changes on the next. You could always click Run. You don't have to go through every step here every single time. If you already know these settings are what you want, you can just run this when you run the MRP wizard. So based on this, I'm going to run my MRP wizard. It's then going to give me my report here. So I'm going to expand this to kind of give us, there's our supply and demand. And based on our demand, what it's suggesting is our information. So our pegging information is based on that. We need to get this amount on the first. So this is kind of what the report's talking about. You can click into these and, oh, here's my forecast that's driving that 300. Maybe there's other open sales orders that would also drive that demand. You can always click into these boxes and see what's driving these things. Like I mentioned before, you can filter possible problem items, so it's only showing that bright beer as a problem item that needs to get in stock ASAP. And then if we click over here into recommendations, if I wasn't running a simulation, see I have a grayed out, I can go back and show you what that looks like here in a second. But based on that, we need to make these many purchase orders or production orders and these many purchase orders within this time frame to meet that demanding of the forecast. Like I mentioned before, you can double click this. So, hey, we need to get a production order for wort in on 4/23 to meet the demand, and 4/30 for the green beer and our bright beer and our finished goods. We need to get all of these set in this time, and then later down the road, we also need to get these in. But if you wanted to see what's most pressing, you can filter by date here. So what I'm going to do is go back to the start. I don't want to run a simulation. So again, if we're back to this screen, I can click order recommendation here, or I can click save recommendations. So if I click save recommendations, it's going to open up this new window. Do I have to click finish too? So the order recommendation window, I make this a little bit bigger for you guys. Get as big as possible. This is where you're actually telling the system, like the MRP is not going to actually create these documents unless you tell it to. So based on our recommendation, those are the documents that they suggest creating. So I go down here and I'm just going to check all of these. And you can see here with that default vendor, this is where that populates. If you have more than one vendor that you purchase from, that's why we recommend leaving it blank. So you have to fill this in. Another note here is with the recommendations, if let's say I had more than just 2-row bulk, let's say I had some other items that also had a default vendor breeze, what the recommendation is going to do is every single item that has breeze selected, it's going to only create one purchase order. So it is something of note, like if you have multiple timelines, it's going to create a purchase order for the earliest timeline in there. So if I check all of these and I click update, 16 new production orders and you can see one new purchase order was created. We're going to go take a look at that purchase order. So it goes by the latest state, or the earliest state that we needed it in, and it puts it up as 3 separate lines here. So that's what it does for purchase orders. If you have the same item, same preferred vendor on separate lines, that's what this is going to do. And all these production orders got created in the system as a planned production order for us. So our wort for Blondbach. More wort. All different dates though, depending on that demand. Green beer. And since I did that, cancel out of this. Choose this scenario again. Let's just do a run scenario. No problem items, because I entered in that recommendation. You'll notice there's not going to be any recommendations because we're going to meet demand. So nothing is going to populate as we need to purchase or produce now. So because I did that, actually entered in their documents, this is what happens when you filter to only things that are going to meet our MRP requirements. So based on my very specific scenario, nothing's showing up now. All right. So that was it for the MRP demo. I'll open it up to any questions you guys might have with the last 10 minutes here and see if we can answer some.
All right, Mike, I haven't seen any questions so far, so now's your chance to throw those in there. While you're typing in your last questions, I want to just do a little bit of a wrap up here. So when we end the meeting today, there's going to be a quick survey that pops up. It's 3 short questions. We really appreciate your feedback. And there's a question on there. If you can think of any other topics that would be really helpful for you, feel free to throw those in there and we will take those into consideration when we build out our next schedule. Just want to thank Mike for presenting for us today. And did you have something, Mike?
Oh, no, just brought up a good point. I'm absolutely looking for any suggestions for future advanced topic webinars. So if you guys do have that during that survey, please put them in there. I like hearing that feedback.
For sure. We'll post this webinar too, the recording of this, on the Obeer O Spirits Help Center, hopefully by the end of today, if not by tomorrow, depending on when that recording gets finished. And I'm not seeing any other questions so far. I'm gonna give it a couple more seconds just in case you're still typing, and then we'll go ahead and wrap up.
And thanks everybody for attending.
All right, no questions so far. Thanks everybody for coming, and thank you, Mike, again for presenting. We really appreciate your knowledge and sharing everything you have with us. So thanks again, everybody, and we will see you next time.